Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So today's video is going to be a sketching video, and I had a lot of fun working on this one. I was just really going with the flow with it and not being too concerned about what I was putting down, and I was just experimenting a lot, and that was what made it really fun, is that it wasn't something that I was trying to constrain myself to my typical style or my typical work process. So it was a lot of fun, and I'll actually have a link down below to where I got my reference, so you can take a look at that. I get all of my reference pretty much from Pinterest, and lately I've been looking up a lot of like witchy fashion or witch clothes, and it brings up this style that I absolutely love, and it's totally something that I would wear. And if I had all the money in the world to just buy a new wardrobe, I would probably make sure that it looked like that. But because I've been looking up that kind of style a lot, it's been bringing a lot of it onto my like front page of Pinterest, which is kind of awesome because I'm able to look at new references and stuff that have the aesthetic and that look that I want. So this one I found that way. It showed up on my front page and I really liked it. I really liked what she was wearing. But I just wanted to turn her into my own character and see what I could do with her and see what details I'd like to keep and what details I would like to add that are my own. So I really like working that way, where it's just a really nice base of making sure that I have the reference for the figure itself correct, and the base reference for the clothing as well, and for the structure of it. And then when it comes to detailing and style, that comes from my side. And right here in particular, I'm struggling a little bit with her chin, and I've noticed the last little while I keep like making people's like jaw and chins just like too big. So I'm kind of trying to figure out why or where the root of my problem is. A lot of times when there's an issue with proportions for things like your face, or when you look at your work and there's just something that's not quite there, a lot of times it comes down to one little element that's throwing it all off, one measurement that's wrong. So for this one, I think that I was just drawing her whole face too small and too far up, which pushed everything up and made her chin look a lot bigger. So until I started resizing that and bringing her mouth closer to her chin, it did start to make it look a little bit better. And there are a lot of examples like that where I've looked at my own work and I'm like, why is it looking like this? What is wrong with it? And then I realize, oh, I just need to shift this one thing over, like her arm, and then it all comes together. Another thing like that is I was drawing her arm much farther away, and I think that realistically she had broader shoulders than I'm drawing, definitely, but the other stylistic things that I had already put into play made it look like she had just like super really far out shoulders, not like broad shoulders, but like shoulders that were at the wrong place, like they were misplaced and they needed to be closer in. So there were a few things like that. Once I started working out how I wanted to show my own style and change things and manipulate it, I started realizing elements that needed to be tailored to that so that it had that flow that it needed, so it all came together. So that was one of those where I had to move her arm in a little bit, and I actually think that I ended up making, I think she's a lot longer in proportion, like by head weight height, I think. I'm not sure on that one, but it does overall look a lot longer than I think the reference itself looks. So there's just elements like that that end up changing it as you're making it your own, which I think is really fascinating and fun to see what elements people take from a reference and what things do they push even farther. And I think maybe one of the things that kind of a little bit tripped me up on the proportions of her body, from like her upper body to her lower body, is there's this middle belt that's cinching in her dress, and I think that in the reference it's higher than where I was like assigning it in my brain. So when I was drawing her, the bottom half, when I was drawing it, it looked like it was way too long and it was way too big. But then when I realized that it's like, oh, that belt, that really is a lot higher up, so it's tricking my eye into looking at like the whole bottom half of her body was much longer. So once I kind of realized that was messing with the way I was looking at the reference and seeing her, I was able to tailor it a little bit better. Because at first when I was looking at that as this benchmark for her waist and this almost this middle ground, which actually the middle of your body is the crotch actually. So you measure from the crotch up to the top of the head. That is, as a rule of thumb, usually the same width from the crotch down to the bottom of your feet. So that is where the center of your body usually is. But because there was this very direct line, it was kind of fooling with what I was thinking. So I kept trying to like shorten her legs and make them shorter than they needed to be. And once I shortened them, I'm like, oh, that looks way too short. So there's just little things like that, that just knowing the proportions of the body is absolutely crucial for when it comes to drawing them, because then you can know where you're seeing the wrong thing and what sort of things you're letting influence you. And the proportions are super easy to learn. They're really great, and I use them all the time. You can't see it because you can't see my hand, but a lot of times I'll go up and I'll measure the heads to make sure that they're the right height. Just on my Cintiq, I'll just measure it up really quick. And sometimes if I want it to be really precise, I can take a copy of their head with the lasso tool and copy it, and then shift it over and then duplicate it. And it's usually roughly, the normal human is 7.5 heads, but a lot of times it's idealized to 8 heads. So that's a good kind of key reference to keep in mind as far as how tall your people should be. And like I said, this is a rule of thumb. So when you're doing things, you're always going to have people who are more heads tall, that are much taller, and you'll have people who are also shorter in proportion to their heads, especially children. That is one key example of being fewer heads tall than that. So that's just a really great tool. And when you're working in Photoshop, it is so easy. That's what I really love about Photoshop, is how easy it makes some of these things, like making sure that it's measured correctly. And I love being able to really get in there and mess it up and duplicate things and switch them around and make sure that the proportions are correct. And that's one element that I'm trying to get better at as far as sketching digitally, because I find that like the middle ground, I struggle with liking the final result or what it looks like. So when I have just really rough sketches, I think they can look great. Even digitally, I think really rough sketches look beautiful, or not even just like really rough, but sketches that are on their own. And then when I refine them out so that they're a finished piece, I really like it. But I haven't quite found a middle ground where it's not, perfectly refined and I have this perfect line work, but it still has maybe color and some elements to it like that. And a lot of times I find when I start incorporating that, it to me looks really messy and I don't like it, and it's almost like I'm no longer comparing it to a sketch, but I'm comparing it to the final result instead. So I'm trying to find ways that I can love doing more finished pieces or finished sketches like this, where I include color, because I love being able to work on color digitally because it is so easy to implement, especially on your sketches, and it's a great way to practice color. So I'm trying to get more into finding the ways that will make me actually enjoy the final look of it. And this one, I ended up adding a lot of layers. I was not really worried about being restrained or making sure that things fit within the already layers that I did. And what I mean by that is, for a long time, until about halfway through my university experience, I would create so many layers, like tons of layers. I would have a new layer for like a tiny thing, like one little highlight in the eye. I'd have its own layer, and I wouldn't label most of them. So I'd have like 60 layers of and I'd put them in groups, which is great to organize it, but I would just create more and more layers, and it was overwhelming, because if I ever wanted to go back to a detail, I'd have to like carefully go through each one and turn it off and on again to see if that's the one. And as a terrible workflow, it really affects my creativity, at least when I have to go through and struggle with the file itself. It takes me out of it like that. So that's something that I used to do a lot. And then I had a teacher that he painted on one layer, and he taught the class that I took for digital illustration. And he was really a proponent for having as few layers as possible. And that's when I really started to push myself to try to create as few layers as possible while I'm creating my files. So I will make sure that if I'm doing a similar thing, I will put them on the same layers. And if I, like a long time ago when I would do the color blocking, I'll do each shape on it almost its own layer. But now I try to fit it like a puzzle, so I'll have as many different sections that are on the same layer that aren't touching as possible, so I have as few flatted layers as possible. And so yeah, so that's a way that I used to work that I feel like I've finally pushed away, and I feel really good about that because now my work process with my layers is a lot more comfortable. I'm able to know where everything is for the most part, and I have a complete grip of it. But for this, that was a very long-winded explanation, but for this piece, I actually decided to let loose and not worry about that anymore, which sounds crazy. I ended up with a ton of layers on this one, like maybe 30, but it was nice because it was a sketch and it wasn't really one that I felt that I needed to go back and really refine. I was able to go in and just add a layer after layer and add these new details on top that I didn't have to worry about going and adding to the sketch. I just added it on top, and then I added effects that were on top and just really like rough brush strokes. And that's what I loved, is that I was able to start incorporating things that were more painterly almost. I mean, they're still with a very solid opaque brush, but they were able to get a lot more free of a look. And that was something that was really exciting to me, because that's where I think my biggest issue with the sketches are, is that I haven't quite found the balance of it looking painterly and rough and raw, and I'm putting too much finesse in some areas and not enough in others. So being able to add those layers that just gave it that spark and that interest while still being really rough almost definitely made it kind of have the more cohesion to it that I wanted. But that is pretty much it for today's video. This is one of the ones that I will be adding to my weekly schedule. I'm going to have a sketching video, probably called Sketching Saturday. I think the actual days that they're going to fall, I'm not quite sure of, but I will have a sketching video, a traditional video. Actually, there's a lot of videos that I want to do and not enough days and time, so I'm still kind of working on it. But I would like to do a sketching, a how-to tutorial review type video that I mentioned. I'd like to do a digital piece. I'd like to do a lot of things. So I'm not sure yet, but I definitely will include a sketching video because I like being able to loosen up and explore ideas better in a sketching type video. So this will definitely be weekly, and I'll start figuring out what days I actually want to release these videos so you can have a concrete schedule on when you can expect what videos. But like I said, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys at my next video, which will be in 2 days.